Good evening. Thank you for taking a moment to listen. Before we begin, I ask that you consider subscribing or leaving a comment if accounts like this matter to you. What you are about to hear was not meant for public release. It stayed buried in internal logs, suppressed reports, and unfiled incident addendums for years. Not because it was unbelievable, but because it was administratively inconvenient. Some events do not fit forms. Some outcomes cannot be acknowledged without admitting that the systems we trust were never designed to protect us. This recording is not dramatized. It is not reconstructed. It is a verbatim survival account. The confession begins now. I work in places where rules exist not to prevent accidents, but to contain something that preys on human behavior. My name is Anthony Lewis. I'm a United States Customs and Border Protection Officer. Have served 21 years in total federal service. 15 of those were assigned to northern land crossings under the Blaine sector. For the last 8 years before closure, I was stationed at the Red Basin Auxiliary Crossing in northern Montana. That crossing does not appear on tourist maps. It sits 72 miles east of the nearest town with a hospital. There is no fuel station, no cell service. Without a government repeater in winter, the road disappears. Officially, Red Basin was decommissioned in 2013. Unofficially, it remains staffed with a skeleton crew under infrastructure oversight protocols. Our jurisdiction covered agricultural inspection, undocumented crossings, and legacy sensor maintenance along a disused trade corridor. The gate logs entries with no vehicles. That is not a metaphor. Before I explain that, you need to understand the environment. Red Basin sits in a shallow valley where wind settles instead of moving through. Snow accumulates in layers, not drifts. Sound carries strangely. You can hear a truck idle 5 miles away, but miss footsteps 10 feet behind you. The crossing itself consisted of one 2-lane road, a reinforced steel gate, a prefab inspection booth, and a maintenance shed with an underground power junction. Cameras covered every approach. Pressure sensors ran beneath the asphalt. The gate arm weighed 900 pounds and required a hydraulic motor to lift. Nothing passed through without being logged. That was Rule 1. We did not call it Rule 1. It was just how things worked. My first winter there, my supervisor told me something during a handoff. He said, "If the system logs an entry and you don't see a vehicle, you stay inside." He did not explain why. I assumed it was a glitch. Everyone does. In my 3rd year at Red Basin, Officer Mark Reyes disappeared. February 2018. At temperature was -27. Visibility was clear. No storm warnings. Mark was 29.6 years in service. He had a newborn daughter in Great Falls. The log showed a gate entry at 2:14 hours. No vehicle ID, no axle weight, no thermal mass. Mark stepped outside anyway. They found his radio 2 days later, 50 yards beyond the gate. Still transmitting. No body was recovered. That was the first death I was formally briefed on. By the time this recording was authorized, there were 7. I'm telling you this because within my first 400 words, you need to understand something. People died because they followed their instincts. They died because they were polite. They died because they believed duty meant response. I did too. On paper, my authority was clear. Inspect, observe, report. In practice, the job was to delay, contain, minimize exposure. Red Basin did not stop crossings. It slowed something down. The first sign that something was wrong came in small administrative discrepancies. Timestamps out of sequence. Audio logs with breathing but no voices. Gate pressure alerts without weight displacement. At first, maintenance blamed frost heave. Then wildlife. Then outdated firmware. The rules came later. They always do. There were 5 of us assigned to Red Basin during my tenure. Never more than 2 on site at once. Rotations lasted 3 weeks. I was the senior officer by default. During my 6th winter, a transport from Havre dropped off a replacement generator. The driver asked why the gate camera pointed inward instead of toward the road. I told him it was for snow glare mitigation. That was a lie. The camera faced inward because whatever triggered the log never appeared on approach. It manifested at the gate. We did not use that word. We called it false entry. False entries followed patterns. They occurred between 1:40 and 03:20. They never happened during storms. They never happened when both officers were awake. Rule 2 was never written. You learned it by watching your partner's face. When the gate logs an entry with no vehicle, only one person acknowledges it. Not outside. Not over the radio. Just verbally, inside the booth. You say, "Entry noted." Nothing else. The first time I heard a voice at the gate, I was alone. February again, it is always February. The intercom activated without a button press. I heard a man clear his throat. "Officer," he said. The voice used the right cadence. The right hesitation. It sounded cold. That mattered. People who are cold speak differently. I stood up. I did not open the door. "Customs and Border Protection," I said. "Identify yourself." There was a pause. Then he said my name. Not my last name, MY first. "Anthony," he said. "I'm lost." Rule 3 came from an old hand named Carl Jensen. He told me during a snowed-in shift when the power flickered. He said, if it knows your name, it learned it from someone else. I did not respond to the intercom. The gate log recorded an entry at 02:02, no vehicle. I stayed inside. The voice did not raise itself. It did not beg. It did not threaten. It thanked me. Then it left. That was the night I started sleeping in 4-hour shifts. The rules expanded slowly. They always do, because no one wants to admit they exist. Rule 4: never open the gate after midnight, even for authorized vehicles. Rule 5: if you hear crying, you log it as wildlife disturbance. Rule 6 was the one that killed Officer Reyes. If the log shows an entry and the cameras show nothing, you assume sensor error unless the intercom activates. Mark assumed error. He stepped outside to reset the pressure strip. The cameras recorded him reaching the gate. They did not record him turning around. When I was assigned his locker, his jacket still smelled like diesel. The entity learned quickly. It learned schedules. It learned language. It learned tone. It never crossed the gate without being logged. That is its limitation. It cannot bypass the system entirely. It must announce itself through our infrastructure. That is why the gate logs matter. During my 7th year, my sister Elena went missing. She was last seen in Kalispell. Her car was found abandoned near a forest road. She knew where I worked. 2 weeks later, the intercom activated at Red Basin. "Anthony," the voice said. "I need help." It was her voice. Same accent. Same clipped vowels. I stood up. My hand was on the door. Rule 7 says never respond to voices you recognize. Rule 7 was added after that night. I did not open the door. I sat on the floor and held my radio until my hands went numb. The log showed an entry at 1:58. When the voice left, it said my mother's name. I did not report that part. By the 8th year, systemic failures began. Cameras froze during false entries. Audio logs corrupted. Maintenance requests denied. Red Basin was scheduled for full closure. The entity became more frequent, more specific. It began using procedural language. "Officer, this is a welfare check." "Officer, I have authorization." "Officer, your partner is injured." Each time, the log recorded an entry. Each time, nothing appeared. Officer Linda Park broke Rule 4 during a whiteout that a voice claimed a snowmobile accident. She opened the gate. The gate arm lifted. The log recorded compliance. Linda did not come back inside. They found her badge near the pressure strip. No blood, no tracks. After that, I stopped correcting the logs. I let the false entries accumulate, because someone needed to know how often it tried. This confession is not about stopping it, but we never stopped it. It is about surviving long enough to warn you. If you ever find yourself near a closed crossing, if you ever hear a voice where no vehicle stands, if a system records something your eyes cannot confirm, do not investigate. Do not respond out of kindness. Do not believe duty means action. The gate logs entries with no vehicles. And something on the other side is very patient. By the time Red Basin was officially marked for closure, the rule system had outgrown the binder it was never written in. Procedures were passed verbally, quietly, usually at the end of a shift, when the generator noise dropped and you could hear the wind settle against the booth walls. That is how real rules survive. They are not taught, they are inherited. After Linda Park disappeared, our staffing was reduced to 1 officer per rotation. That decision was justified as budgetary. T was actually containment. 2 officers created conversation. Conversation created doubt. Doubt led to testing the rules. Alone, you followed them. My authority expanded and narrowed at the same time. I had full control of the site. I had no backup. The next rule came from a maintenance contractor named Harold Knox. He'd been servicing Northern Crossings since the late 90s. He never stayed past sundown. During one visit, he unplugged the intercom before I could stop him. "You don't need that," he said. I told him it was federally required. He shook his head. "Only if you answer it," he said. Rule 8, if the intercom activates on its own, you do not disable it. Disabling it causes escalation. We learned that 3 weeks later. The intercom cut out during a false entry at 02:11, no voice. Just static. The gate arm began to lift without hydraulic activation. The log recorded a manual override. There was no override. I locked myself in the bathroom. That is not procedure. That is instinct. The gate arm stopped halfway. When I reviewed the footage later, the camera facing inward captured something new. Condensation. Not breath pressure. As if something leaned against the gate from the wrong side. After that night, the intercom never failed again. The entity had learned something. It learned consequences. That is the mistake we made early on. We assumed it was testing us randomly. It was testing cause and effect. The rules were not barriers, they were feedback. The next violation came from duty conflict. In October 2020, a wildfire burned through the Canadian side of the corridor. Evacuation routes were confused. Red Basin was listed as closed, but not impassable. We received a directive to stand by for emergency traffic. That directive did not come from my chain of command, it came from infrastructure coordination. The log recorded an entry at 01:46 that thermal mass registered briefly. For the first time, the sensors detected heat. The cameras showed nothing. The intercom activated. "Officer Lewis," a male voice said. "We have evacuees." Plural. That was new. I contacted regional command, there no response. I contacted have a dispatch, static. The radio crackled. Then I heard a child cough. That sound bypasses training. I stood. Rule 9 was not yet spoken. I opened the inner door. The outer gate did not lift. The coughing stopped. The log recorded compliance anyway. When I stepped onto the asphalt, the air felt heavier. Not colder, denser. I called out. No answer. Then I smelled smoke. Real smoke. That is how it nearly succeeded. I backed inside and sealed the door. For the next 6 hours, the intercom played evacuation chatter. Different voices, different ages. None overlapped. The cameras showed only the gate. At dawn, the smoke smell vanished. Regional command called at 08:12. They asked why I had not logged evacuees. There were none. Rule 9 was added that morning. If the threat presents multiple dependents, it is not an emergency. It is leverage. By winter, Red Basin was no longer on any staffing list. I was technically reassigned. Unofficially, I remained. Someone had to keep the logs. The entity increased frequency. False entries occurred nightly. It began referencing internal memos, shift changes, names of officers I had not worked with in years. It spoke like a briefing. You are authorized to respond. You are cleared to approach. It learned our language faster than we learned restraint. The next loss was personal. My mother died in April 2021 at natural causes. Stroke. I took leave. When I returned, the first false entry occurred at 1:59. The intercom did not activate. Instead, the radio did. Her voice came through my personal channel. "Anthony," she said, "you're working too much." Rule 10 came too late for that moment. Never trust transmissions that bypass protocol. I did not respond. The radio continued for 11 minutes. She asked about my health. My sister. She apologized. I shut the radio off. The log recorded an entry at 2 o'clock. When I turned the radio back on at dawn, there were no recorded transmissions. I filed nothing. The entity began to exploit silence. It stopped speaking some nights. Just logging entries. Dozens. As if pacing. That is when systemic failure became unavoidable. The power grid began to fluctuate, generators tripped. Battery backups drained faster than capacity allowed. Maintenance requests were denied outright. Red Basin was erased administratively. But the gate remained powered. That was not an accident. The gate was not there to stop vehicles anymore. It was there to mark a boundary. In July 2022, a new officer was assigned temporarily. His name was Evan Morales. 24 First Northern Posting. I tried to have him reassigned. Command refused. He arrived cheerful, unprepared. I gave him the rules I could. Not all of them. You never give all the rules at once. That causes questions. On his fourth night, the intercom activated. The voice used his name. He looked at me. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I said yes. He reached for the door. I told him to sit down. The voice changed. It sounded like his father. He froze. That hesitation saved him. The log recorded an entry at 2:07. The voice thanked us both. Evan requested transfer the next morning. He survived. That is not always the same thing. By the end of that year, Red Basin experienced its first internal breach. The entity did not cross the gate. It did not need to. The maintenance shed door opened on its own at 3:14. The log recorded nothing. That was the violation. The system did not register it. The entity had found a blind spot. Rule 11 was created in panic. If the system fails to log an entry, you assume it is already inside. I locked myself in the booth and waited. For hours, I heard footsteps in the shed. Tools moving. Paper rustling. It did not speak. At sunrise, the shed was untouched. Except for one thing. The rules binder was open. A page had been turned. The entity had learned to read. That was when I understood something essential. The rules were not protections. They were communication. Every time we followed one, we told it where the lines were. Every time we broke one, we showed it how to bend them. I am still stationed here as I record this. Officially, Red Basin does not exist. Unofficially, the gate logs entries every night. The entity has not crossed yet. But it is closer. If you take anything from this, understand this. Authority does not grant control. It grants responsibility. And responsibility is what it feeds on. After the maintenance shed incident, time stopped behaving normally at Red Basin. Days still passed. Shifts still rotated on paper. But internally, everything compressed into nights. I slept during daylight that I logged after dusk. That was not a rule. That was survival. The entity did not need darkness. IT preferred fatigue. The next system failure was subtle. IT involved paperwork. Entries began appearing in the log with my credentials. Correct badge number. Correct access code. Correct syntax. I did not submit them. Rule 12 emerged quietly. If the system shows your authorization without your action, you do not correct it. Correction implies consent. I initialed nothing. I signed nothing. I let the false paperwork stand. That decision cost me my pension eligibility. T also likely kept the boundary intact. In November 2022, a snowstorm isolated Red Basin for 9 days. No supply runs, no radio contact for the first 4. The generator fuel dropped below safe margins. I initiated load shedding. Cameras went dark one by one. The inward-facing camera stayed online. Always. At 2:03 on the fifth night, the gate log registered 3 consecutive entries, no pause between them. The intercom activated. "Officer Lewis," the voice said. "You're not alone." I did not respond. "You left a light on," it said. The maintenance shed light flickered. I cut power to it. The voice sighed. That sound was new. It carried disappointment. Rule 13 was formed in that moment. If it expresses emotion, it is not reacting, it is calibrating. The next violation came from exhaustion. On night 7, I fell asleep at the console point 10 minutes. Maybe less. When I woke, the log showed an entry at 01:57, no camera feed, no audio. But the inner door was unlocked. I had unlocked it. I do not remember doing so. Rule 14 followed. If you cannot remember an action, assume it was influenced. I relocked the door and sat on the floor until morning. Nothing happened. That frightened me more than escalation. Silence meant proximity. By December, the entity began to use names of the dead. Officer Reyes, Linda Park, Carl Jensen. It did not mimic their voices, it referenced them. "You're understaffed," it said once. "You could use help." It began offering solutions. That is another thing people misunderstand. It does not want chaos. It wants access. The second high-impact incident occurred during a scheduled inspection. Despite closure, a joint oversight audit was mandated. 2 officials arrived by helicopter at noon. They stayed 6 hours. Nothing happened. That was intentional. The entity does not reveal itself to crowds, it waits for authority to isolate itself. After they left, the gate log recorded an entry at 1:49. The intercom activated. "You failed inspection," the voice said. I laughed once. That was my mistake. Rule 15 should have existed already. Never respond emotionally. The laughter echoed in the booth. Then it echoed back. Not imitation, interpretation. It laughed the way someone laughs when they have learned something useful. That night, the inward camera recorded a shape for the first time. Not a body, a distortion. The air bent near the gate. Like heat above asphalt. I documented it. The footage was deleted remotely within the hour. Systemic failure was no longer accidental. Someone else knew. In January 2023, my sister Elena was declared legally dead, no remains recovered. The paperwork arrived at Red Basin by mistake. Wrong routing code. The entity referenced it that night. Paperwork can be corrected, it said. That was the closest I came to opening the door. Rule 16 exists because I stayed seated. Never negotiate. It does not trade fairly. February returned. It always does. The entity's activity peaked between the 15th and 22nd. On the 16th, the gate arm lifted 2 inches without power. The log recorded no entry. That broke everything. Rule 11 activated. Assume it is inside. I armed myself. Not to fight a TO anchor reality. Weapons change posture. Posture changes behavior. The entity did not approach. Instead, it used the intercom to play a recorded emergency alert tone. Perfectly. That tone is designed to compel response. I turned off my hearing aids. Yes, did I wear them now? Prolonged exposure damaged my hearing. That was not the entity, that was the job. When the tone stopped, the voice spoke quietly. "You're tired," it said. I did not deny it. Dawn came late that day. The inward camera showed frost forming on the inside of the glass. That had never happened before. The boundary was thinning. On February 19th, Evan Morales called me. He was drunk. He said he dreamed about the gate. He said it was calling him. He asked if he should come back. I told him no, that he died in a car accident 2 weeks later. I do not know if that was coincidence. I do not think about it often. By March, I was no longer receiving pay. I stayed anyway. That is the part people judge. They think I was obsessed. I was contained. If I left, someone else would be assigned. Someone without rules. The entity learned to exploit compassion first. Then duty. Then routine. Routine is the most dangerous. In April, the intercom activated during daylight. That had never happened. The voice used my mother's tone again. It said nothing. It breathed. I shut down the intercom entirely. Rule 8 violation. The lights flickered. The gate arm lifted 3 inches. The log recorded my authorization. I renabled the intercom. The gate settled. I apologized. That was not intentional. Rule 17 exists because of that word. Never apologize. It implies fault. Fault implies obligation. I am still here because I learned that lesson early enough. Barely. The entity is patient. IT does not rush mistakes. It waits for erosion. And erosion is inevitable. By the 4th year after closure, Red Basin no longer felt like a posting. It felt like a quarantine. I stopped marking time by dates. I marked it by failures. The first failure of that year was internal. I began hearing the intercom activate when it had not there no log entry, no power draw. Just the click. Rule 18 formed slowly. If you think you heard something, you did. Doubt was another vector. I began narrating my actions aloud. Not for sanity, for record. Standing. Sitting. Door locked. The microphones captured everything. The entity listened. It began repeating my words back to me. Not immediately, later. Delayed mimicry. That is how I knew it was no longer just observing behavior. IT was learning sequence. In June, a new protocol came down from Regional Infrastructure Oversight. IT was unsigned, unattributed. It stated that Red Basin's gate was to remain powered indefinitely to no explanation. That was confirmation. Someone else understood the boundary. The entity responded that night by using the emergency phone line. Not the intercom. That phone had a physical handset, there no speaker. It rang once. I did not answer. The voicemail recorded anyway. It was my own voice. Calm. Professional. It recited my name, title, and years of service accurately. Then it said, "You're cleared to stand down." Rule 19 emerged immediately. If it offers relief, it is lying. I deleted the voicemail. The system restored it. I unplugged the phone. The ringing continued. That lasted 3 hours. When it stopped, the log showed no entries. That silence was strategic. The second high-impact event occurred during a weather inversion in August. Smoke from distant fires settled into the valley. Visibility dropped to 20 yards. At 14:12, the gate log recorded an entry. Daylight entries were rare. They were always significant. The cameras showed the smoke shifting. Nothing else. The intercom activated. "This is a safety concern," the voice said. It used my cadence. I responded without thinking. "State your business." That was a violation. The voice paused. Then it said, "Thank you." The gate arm lifted 1 inch. The inward camera showed pressure against the glass again. Stronger. I cut power to everything except the gate. Rule 20 was born in that panic. If escalation begins, reduce inputs. The smoke cleared by sunset. The gate arm lowered. The log recorded my response as authorization. That mark has not been removed. From that day forward, the entity addressed me as if we were in conversation. Not dialogue process. "You respond faster now," it said one night. "You're adapting." That was not praise. That was assessment. In September, I received a letter from my father handwritten. He had not written to me in years. The envelope bore no return address. Inside was a single sentence. "You don't have to do this anymore." The handwriting was correct. The phrasing was not. My father never told anyone to stop working. Rule 21 formed quietly. If contact arrives without effort, it is not human. I burned the letter in the incinerator. The smoke alarm triggered. The entity laughed. Not allowed. Through the fire suppression system. That laugh sounded like relief. It had learned humor. October brought the third loss. My nephew Miguel Elena's son. 16. He ran away from foster care. They found his backpack near a decommissioned logging road. The road did not lead anywhere near Red Basin. That night, the intercom activated with no log entry. That should not have been possible. Rule 11 triggered again. Assume it is inside. The voice was Miguel's. He was crying. That sound bypasses rules. I stood. I did not open the door. I did not speak. I slid down the wall and stayed there until my legs went numb. The crying lasted 37 minutes. When it stopped, the gate log recorded an entry retroactively. Timestamp adjusted. The system was no longer linear. That was when I realized the entity was no longer bound strictly by our infrastructure. It was using it as reference. The limitation still held. It could not cross the gate without acknowledgement. But it could reach through memory. Through guilt, through names. The winter that followed was the hardest. I stopped calling anyone. Stopped answering emails. The entity began filling the silence with routine chatter. Weather updates. Shift reminders. Policy excerpts. All accurate. All unnecessary. It was rehearsing. In January, the power failed completely for 11 minutes. Total blackout. When the lights returned, the inward camera showed frost patterns forming shapes. Not symbols. Paths. Leading from the gate toward the booth. Stopping at the door. Rule 22 exists because I did not follow those paths. Never trace what it offers. February came again. The entity stopped speaking entirely. The log recorded entries every night. Sometimes dozens. No audio, no camera anomalies. Just pressure data. It was pushing. Testing endurance. On February 21st, I received a transfer order. Immediate. No replacement listed. That should have been relief. It felt like surrender. That night, the intercom activated one last time before midnight. "You can go," it said. It used no voice I recognized. That was worse. I did not respond. The gate log recorded no entry. That meant it was not at the gate. That meant it was somewhere else. Inside. I slept with the lights on. In the morning, the transfer order was rescinded. Clerical error. The entity had tested withdrawal. It had learned the effect of hope. Hope erodes rules faster than fear. By spring, my voice had changed. Lower, quieter. I spoke less. The entity adjusted accordingly. Shorter sentences. Mirroring restraint. This is the part of the confession where people expect escalation, a breach, a crossing. That is not how it works. It does not rush the ending. It prepares you to accept it. And I was close. By the time spring settled fully into the valley, I no longer trusted my internal sense of readiness. I trusted checklists. I trusted repetition. I trusted the gate. That sounds wrong, but you need to understand something. The gate was honest. It logged what happened. IT did not care how I felt about it. Everything else did. The entity shifted tactics after the transfer order incident. T stopped applying pressure directly. Instead, it reduced activity. Fewer entries. More space between them. That lull was deliberate. Rule 23 exists because of what followed. If it gives you time, it expects you to fill it. I filled it with maintenance. Cleaning. Inventory. I fixed things that did not need fixing. That is how erosion works. You create reasons to move. The first real breach attempt did not involve the gate, it involved policy. In May, I received an official directive authorizing a civilian inspection team, environmental impact assessment. Names listed, dates approved. Everything checked out. Except the routing code. It originated from an office that had been dissolved 3 years earlier. Rule 24 came too late to prevent the meeting. If authorization is perfect, it is suspect. The team arrived in 2 SUVs just after noon. 3 people. They passed the outer perimeter without incident. That alone was unusual. The gate did not log their arrival. That was the first time real vehicles crossed the boundary without being recorded. The inward camera showed them clearly. Normal human. They smiled. They shook my hand. Their accents were regional. Their paperwork immaculate. They did not ask about the false entries. They asked about my well-being. That is how I knew. They were not the entity. They were influenced by it. Proxy is the correct term. They stayed 4 hours, asked routine questions. Then one of them, a woman named Claire, asked to see the maintenance shed. I said no. She asked why. I did not answer. She smiled politely and said, "It's on the checklist." Rule 25 was violated in that moment. Never justify refusal. I told her it was unsafe. She nodded. The entity learned something important that day. It learned how authority overrides instinct in others. When they left, the gate logged an entry, not an exit. The log recorded them arriving again. At 2:22. No vehicles. That night, the intercom activated using Claire's voice. She apologized for the inconvenience. She said she left something behind. I did not respond. The voice did not escalate. It thanked me for my professionalism. That was worse. Rule 26 exists because of that tone. If it validates you, it is positioning itself as equal. June brought storms, flash floods. The road washed out 20 miles south. I was cut off completely. Supply drops were delayed. I rationed. The entity began referencing hunger. "Are you eating enough?" it asked one night. It knew the inventory. I stopped responding to internal prompts altogether. No acknowledgements, no verbal logs. Silence became my last defense. The entity adjusted again. It began using external noise. Knocking. Not at the door, at the walls. Different locations. Testing orientation. Rule 27 formed under my breath. If sound moves, it is mapping. I sat in the center of the booth and waited. The knocking stopped. The gate logged an entry. At 3:01. July brought heat. Insects. The inward camera showed moths clustering near the gate. Then near the booth. Then forming lines. I shut off exterior lights. The moths remained. That night, the entity spoke for the first time in weeks. "You're doing well," it said. I closed my eyes. The gate arm lifted 1 inch. I did not open them. When I did, the arm was down. The log recorded my presence as authorization. That mark joined the others. They form a pattern. I do not know what it spells. In August, I received a call from my supervisor, a real one. He said my position was being eliminated permanently, no reassignment, no replacement. He thanked me. He said, "You've done enough." I asked who would take over. He said there was no need. Red Basin would be decommissioned fully. The gate would be removed. That was the first time I felt actual fear. The entity did not speak that night. The log recorded entries every hour. Consistent. Measured. It was preparing. Rule 28 exists because of what I did next. If removal is announced, delay it. I filed appeals, safety reports, environmental objections. I cited unexploded ordnance, protected species, anything. The process slowed. The entity responded by using memory. On August 29th, The intercom activated using my sister's voice again. Not Elena. Another sister. One who died in childhood. I had never spoken her name aloud at Red Basin. I did not move. The voice said nothing. It just breathed. The gate did not log an entry. That meant it was not at the boundary. It was closer. Inside my head. Rule 29 exists because I did not scream. If it reaches memory without prompt, it is no longer asking. September brought equipment failures. Simultaneous. Cameras. Sensors. Power relays. Only the gate remained fully operational. The inward camera flickered. For one frame, I saw a silhouette. Not human. Too tall, too narrow. No features. Just absence where something should be. The frame was overwritten immediately. I did not report it. Reports accelerate timelines. The entity spoke the following night. You see better now, it said. That was confirmation. I had crossed an internal threshold. The last high-impact event of this part happened on October 4th. A storm knocked out power across the region. The generator failed to start. Total darkness. The gate arm lifted fully. No log entry. That should not have been possible. The limitation was failing. I stood in the dark and waited. The intercom activated without power. You can stop pretending, the voice said. It did not mimic anyone. It did not use my name. It spoke plainly. I need you to open the door, it said. I laughed once. Not from humor, from exhaustion. I said nothing else. The gate arm lowered slowly. The lights returned minutes later. The log showed no record of the event. That scared me more than anything before. Because it meant the system could be bypassed if I was compliant. And one day, I might be. That is why this confession exists. Because compliance is not a single action. It is a condition you slide into. And I was sliding. I am recording this because I no longer trust my ability to hold the line indefinitely. That sentence is not feared, it is assessment. Containment fails slowly, then all at once. After the October blackout, the entity changed in a way I cannot fully document. Not in behavior and posture. It stopped asking. Stopped testing. It waited. Waiting is not passive. Waiting is preparation without waste. The decommission order returned in November. This time with equipment manifests attached. Dates, contractors. No appeal window. Rule 30 was spoken aloud to no one. If removal is inevitable, shift the burden outward. That was the last rule I created. I began leaking information. Not reports, rumors. I contacted infrastructure inspectors anonymously. I referenced unexplained losses, sensor anomalies, unresolved disappearances. I never named the entity. Names create targets. Within weeks, oversight stalled again. Committees formed, reviews delayed. The entity noticed immediately. That night, the intercom activated softly. You're making this difficult, it said. That was new. Not accusation. Observation. I did not respond. IT continued anyway. You understand process, it said. So do I. I closed my eyes. The inward camera did not flicker. The gate did not move. It was speaking from memory. From accumulated permission. That was the moment I understood the final shape of the threat. It does not cross boundaries. It inherits them. Every rule we built was a scaffold. Every exception was a rung. It was never trying to break in. It was training us to let it out. The next loss was quieter than the others. Carl Jensen's wife called the station number. She asked for him. He had been dead for years. I told her the truth, that he was gone. She paused. Then she asked why he kept calling her from Montana. I ended the call. The entity was no longer confined to Red Basin. It was using contact chains, names, associations, authority networks. I disconnected all external lines. That did not stop it. It began using my own voice in outbound calls. Short ones. Missed calls. Voicemail fragments. I stopped listening to them. Rule 31. If it reaches beyond the site, you do not follow. Following spreads it. December arrived without snow. That was wrong. The valley felt exposed. On December 12th, the gate logged an entry at midnight exactly. No variance. The intercom activated. This is a scheduled transition, the voice said. I asked one question. What happens if I refuse? That was my second mistake. The voice did not answer immediately. When it did, it spoke carefully. Someone else will do this, it said. That was the truth. It always tells the truth when it matters least. I sat down. For the first time in years, I considered leaving without replacement. Just driving away. Letting the system fail. Rule 32 formed and broke in the same thought. Abandonment does not end containment. It accelerates it. I stayed. Christmas passed unnoticed. On New Year's Eve, the entity played recorded countdown audio through the intercom. Different years, different crowds. All accurate. At midnight, it said, "Happy New Year, Anthony." I did not acknowledge it. But I did cry. That mattered. Emotion is not a violation. Expression is. Tears are internal. Speech is a bridge. January came again. The gate logs slowed. One entry every 2 nights. Then one a week. The entity was conserving energy. I was being prepared for handoff. In February, exactly 5 years after Mark Reyes disappeared, the intercom activated during a clear night. No wind there, no static. The voice did not mimic anyone. It sounded old. Not aged, experienced. "Anthony," it said. I responded without words. Just breathing. It continued anyway. "You've done what you can," it said. "You were sufficient." Sufficient. That word implies replacement. I stood. The gate arm did not move. The inward camera remained clear. "You don't need to open anything," it said. "You already did." That was when I understood the final limitation. It cannot bypass the gate without acknowledgement. But acknowledgement is not physical. It is acceptance. I had accepted responsibility. I had accepted permanence. I had accepted that someone must always be here. That belief was the door. I sat back down. I said one sentence. "This ends with me." The entity was silent for a long time. Then it said, "No." That was the first refusal it ever gave me. The following morning, a convoy arrived unannounced. 3 vehicles. Government plates. The gate logged their arrival correctly. They had orders. Removal orders. I did not stop them. Rule 33 was not written. If containment fails, document and warn. They shut down the booth. Disconnected cameras. The gate lost power. The arm sagged halfway. The log stopped updating. The entity did not speak. Not once. As they worked, I watched the valley. The air felt lighter. Not safer. Unobserved. When the gate was cut free, something changed. Not violently. Quietly. The pressure that had lived in my chest for years eased. Not because it was gone. Because it was no longer focused. Containment had failed. Diffusion had begun. I was escorted away. Debriefed. Evaluated. They called it occupational stress. They did not ask about the rules. They never do. I am no longer in service. I do not work at Red Basin. Red Basin no longer exists. But the entity does. It was never bound to one place. It was bound to systems. To authority. To people who believe responsibility means presence. That is why I am speaking to you now. If you work in infrastructure, border control, emergency response, utilities, remote oversight. Listen carefully. If a system logs activity your senses cannot confirm, do not investigate. If a voice uses your name without proper introduction, do not respond. If compassion conflicts with procedure, choose procedure. If duty demands immediate action without verification, delay. If something thanks you for compliance, withdraw. Never apologize. Never negotiate. Never assume you are the last one standing. Because it does not need everyone. It only needs one. Rules do not stop it. Rules teach it. And once it learns enough, it no longer needs the rules at all. This confession is not closure. It is a record made too late. A warning issued after release. If you hear a gate that logs entries with no vehicles, do not stay to understand why. Leave before you believe. It is your responsibility to remain. Because that belief is the final acknowledgement. And once given, it does not need the gate anymore.